My name's Andy Vaughn. We're thrilled that you're here. We have about 1,000 in-person registrants, maybe 200 virtual attendees. This may be our biggest meeting yet. I don't have the final numbers. And I cannot see anything because of these lights, but I can recognize that how and who that is, so thank you. No, it's really a privilege to welcome you here for our 125th year. Before I start, I want to recognize our staff. There are two people especially who make this meeting run really well. Arlene Press, I'm blinded by the lights, but wherever you are. And Jared Kohler is the one who makes sure the hybrid meeting runs well. And all of our ASOR staff, they've been working hard really all year long, but especially the last 6 weeks. So thank you to all of them. I have several announcements. The next slide is starting here. I don't know if Jared's, yeah, go. Well, I want to thank our platinum sponsors, University of Chicago journals, University of Chicago Press journals, ISD, and also Eisenbrauns. Their support really makes the meeting go well, so we thank the three platinum sponsors. Also want to thank all of our other sponsors and all of the exhibitors. I think it's one of our largest exhibits yet. One of the we'll be back here Saturday night for 125th celebratory dinner. I think many of you have signed up, like 300 people have signed up. If you have not signed up, we've had a few cancellations. If you would like to attend, please stop by the help desk. We have a waiting list, and we want to make sure that all of the meals are used, and we really want everybody to attend. I want to recognize, in celebration of our 125th year, our development committee and all of ASOR has been hard at work. We have a $5 million campaign, which many people thought was too ambitious for us. And I'm thrilled to announce that we have exceeded that $5 million goal as of last week by $6,000. But just received a pledge for $55,000, which took us further. So I'm hoping that by the end of this weekend, we'll be further along. That includes legacy gifts. We're at about $5.9 million right now, or $5.8 million with legacy gifts. We're at about $3.8 million in cash gift and cash pledges payable in the next year. And we hope that we're going to be at the $4 million range there. That's allowing us to award right now $250,000 a year in scholarships and grants and fellowships. We hope within 5 years, $300,000. So I hope you will congratulate yourselves on this great campaign. The last few years, I've said, started a new tradition for me. In addition to welcoming you, reading a poem. Last year I read one by Walt Whitman, and then another poem. The other poem was about how doubt and acts of love can allow us to change the world. The poem for this year that's important for me is how I can change the world, but it's written to Cain. I'm a biblical scholar. And it's written to Cain, the son of Adam and Eve, who killed his brother. And it calls on me, or us, to think about changing the world, and not that we're the righteous one, but that we may be the one causing problems. And I think Tim's talk is looking at how cultural heritage can change the world. And for me, rather than thinking I'm righteous, think about how I may be the one causing problems. This is a poem by Don Pagis. The title is Written in Pencil in a Sealed Vault. Here in this transporter, I am Eve, with Adam, my son. If you see my oldest son, Cain, son of Adam, tell him that I, and then it's meant to go back to the start again. Here in this transporter, I am Eve, with Abel, my son. If you see my oldest son, Cain, son of Adam, tell him that I. So for me, as I reflect on our world in turmoil, I think how I might be the one causing that, and recognizing that others are in a less fortunate or hard situation, and how I might hear that call to change the world. And I think Tim's going to be talking with us about that. It's my pleasure now to introduce President Sharon Herbert, who's finishing her 6th year, and she's going to introduce Professor Timothy Harrison, who's giving our plenary address. Thank you.
Hi there. As you heard, I'm Sharon Herbert, the president. God, this is really here. All right, you get my profile. I'm Sharon Herbert, the president of ASOR. This is the final year of my 2nd term in the office, and will be the last time I have the honor of introducing the plenary speaker and welcoming you all. It's been quite a ride. And an honor. As you've heard, this year we are celebrating our 125th birthday. There is much to celebrate. 125 years is a long time for a learned society to survive and prosper. And ASOR has prospered, mainly because of the good work of you, our members. A very happy event then. But these are terribly troubled times, and there is also much cause for concern. The tragic conflicts in the Middle East are never far from our thoughts. ASOR struggles, not always successfully, to provide forums where all feel welcome to speak and be heard with respect. As we gather here in Boston for the next several days of papers and workshops, and convivial, I hope, conversation, we will be looking for ways to move forward in this fog of war. What are we archaeologists responsible? What are archaeologists' responsibilities to the cultural heritage we uncover and to the peoples with whom we work? Our plenary invitee, Professor Tim Harrison, will be touching upon some of these issues tonight. Sorry about this. I turn now to introducing our speaker. Tim Harrison is the quintessential man that needs no introduction to this audience, having served 2 terms as president of ASOR from 2009 to 2013. But yet, I introduce him. His insightful and energetic leadership of ASOR in those years was transformative. Tim has done a few other things that are worthy of note since then. However, he is currently, since 2023, director of the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures, formerly the Oriental Institute, at the University of Chicago, and professor of Near Eastern Archaeology and the Department of Middle Eastern Studies there. Prior to his move to Chicago, he had a distinguished career as professor of Near Eastern Archaeology at the University of Toronto from 1997, where he served as chair of the Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations from 2001 to 2022. Somehow, in the midst of all this service, Tim has made time to direct and publish excavations of 2 important sites. Tim has led the excavations at the Bronze and Iron Age site of Tall Madaba in Jordan between 1996 and 2006, and since 2000, he has directed the ongoing Tayinat Archaeological Project in southeastern Turkey. These projects form part of a broader agenda, a broader regional research effort that seeks to shed light on the rise of early complex societies in the Eastern Mediterranean. As part of this effort, Tim really does get around. As part of this effort, in 2012, Tim launched the Crane Project. This is not a bird. It is, and I will spell it out for you, the Computational Research on the Archaeological Near East Project, an international consortium of researchers and projects conducting research in the Orontes watershed and the Eastern Mediterranean. Tim has published extensively on the Bronze and Iron Age cultures of the Levant, including 4 monographs and more than 140 articles and papers. In 2020, Tim joined the international team working on the post-conflict restoration of the World Heritage Site of Nineveh in East Mosul, Iraq. In conducting all these projects, Tim has observed and thought deeply about the practice of archaeology in the Middle East, the interactions between foreign and local archaeologists and their wider communities, and how we might work to ameliorate the devastating effects of regional conflicts on the remains of cultural heritage there. In this lecture tonight, the Middle East cultural heritage crisis and why it matters, he will be sharing these thoughts with us. Please join me in welcoming Professor Tim Harrison.
Thank you, Sharon. It's a real privilege and an honor to be able to come this evening and speak and deliver the plenary address. And I have to say, as a kind of opening, maybe a disclaimer, having sat on the other side of these for many years when I was in the leadership of ASOR, I know how thankless a job this is. And so I want to be upfront and say that when Sharon came to me a couple years ago and asked me if I would speak, at first my thought was, under no circumstances would I consider doing so. But seriously, after some consideration and thought, I said yes. And I want to basically say as a kind of opening comment that what I want to speak about and what I want to share this evening, which is very personal in a reflection of some 40 years of field work in the Middle East, is very much that. It's personal, and I hope that you will hear me speaking from the heart on a complex topic that is deeply contentious often, certainly polarizing, and has caused lots of tension within our own organization. So let me begin by saying that archaeological exploration, and more specifically, traditional Western, European, and North American involvement in the archaeological exploration of the ancient Near East faces, in my view, an existential crisis. Navigating this challenge, I believe, will require a fundamental change in how we, as Western researchers, approach and conduct fieldwork in the region, if we are to participate meaningfully in the transformations underway. But before I continue, I request an indulgence. As we've heard, we are celebrating the 125th anniversary of ASOR's founding, and this has prompted some personal reflections of my own. This year also happens to mark the 40th year since my first visit to the Middle East, which also coincided with my first experience of ASOR. In 1985, as a sophomore in college, I was the very excited recipient of a USIA-funded scholarship to participate in an international youth exchange program with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan that was administered by ASOR. That summer, I participated in 3 different archaeological excavations: an Epipaleolithic site called Ain Rahub, a late Neolithic site, Jebel Abu Thawab, and the remarkable early Bronze Age site of Zarakun. All 3 sites were located in northern Jordan, and the projects co-directed by Jordanian scholars affiliated with the then newly established Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology at Yarmouk University in Irbid. This remarkable opportunity opened new worlds for me, and the experience fundamentally changed my life. I would also like to share briefly a second experience, a little bit more difficult, that has also profoundly shaped me. On May 11, 2013, at about 2 p.m. local time, 2 car bombs were detonated in the central district of Rayhanla, or Rayhaniya as it is known in Arabic. It was a Saturday afternoon, a market day, and the town was crowded with pedestrian shoppers out purchasing their groceries and supplies in the town's popular open-air markets for the week ahead. The twin explosions, ignited seconds apart to maximize their destructive effect, killed more than 50 people and injured hundreds more. Rayhanla is a border town of about 100,000 people, halfway between Aleppo and the Turkish city of Antakya, ancient Antioch, which we often famously associate in our modern Western imagination with the chariot races depicted in the Hollywood movie Ben-Hur. Rayhanla sits on a deep cultural, ethnic, religious, and political fault line, and the May 11 attack signaled the arrival of the Syrian civil conflict to Turkey's southern doorstep. The Rayhanla attack utterly changed my life. As an archaeologist of the ancient Near East, I was trained and infused with a view of the ancient world as a distant past, entirely disembedded and disconnected from the contemporary world and communities of the modern Middle East, in all of their complexity, seeming chaos, and conflict. This ancient world was to be studied and explored on its own terms, even glorified and romanticized. Yes, I had to put up a slide of Indiana Jones. As advanced early civilizations, but without engagement with the present-day descendant communities of which they are fundamentally a part. This ethnocentric view was shattered for me by the Rayhanla bombings. By that point, I had been conducting archaeological excavations in the Middle East for almost 30 years, and since 2004, leading a team excavating at the mounded site of Tayinat, ancient Kunalua, located just 20 kilometers west of Rayhanla. And we had actually been living in Rayhanla. That was the location of our excavation home. So this was very personal, very intimate, as it were. Tayinat, as many of you probably already know, was the royal city of a succession of Bronze and Iron Age kingdoms and precursor to nearby classical Antioch. The Tayinat excavations have documented the remarkable cultural fluorescence and heritage of the communities that have lived and thrived in this contested region since the rise of the world's first cities and earliest civilizations more than 5,000 years ago, including astounding monumental sculptural traditions, luxury craft industries, and one of the region's oldest surviving treaties. But Tayinat has also produced vivid evidence of the violent cruelty that has all too frequently been part of its history. The Rayhanla bombings forced me to confront the motivations that have guided my professional life as an archaeologist, and to consider more deeply the root causes of the conflicts that engulf the region today. Can a deepened understanding of the cultural heritage of the Middle East contribute to conflict resolution and the restoration of thriving, vibrant communities? I believe that such a deep time perspective offers the prospect of identifying the dynamics and the patterns that drive these conflicts, in particular the contested role of memory, cultural identity, and place, which are inextricably embedded within the social fabric of these communities, and ultimately foster their sense of meaning, order, and well-being. A knowledge and understanding of this cultural history, therefore, and the underlying dynamics that have given it shape, I believe, offer the hope of bridging cultural, ethnic, and sectarian divides, and the building of better understanding between communities. Now, the formative role of community memory in shaping cultural or collective identities and their deep and enduring embedment within landscapes has gained increasing recognition in Near Eastern archaeological research. Indeed, you'll hear about it frequently in sessions at the annual ASOR meetings. However, concomitant with this awareness has come the growing acknowledgement that the study of the ancient past cannot be conducted in isolation from the living communities within which these ancient cultural legacies are inextricably linked, with all of their social, economic, political, and historical complexities. The UNESCO World Heritage Convention defines cultural heritage as the collective legacy of physical artifacts, monuments, building complexes and structures, and intangible attributes, cuisine, music, etc., of a group or society that are inherited from past generations, maintained in the present, and preserved for the benefit of future generations. It binds together communities and nations through shared history and identity. Despite its vital, formative role in the creation and sustenance of flourishing communities, and indeed all too often, specifically because of this, the preservation of cultural heritage is at perpetual risk. This has perhaps never been more true in the Middle East than it is at present. The conflicts that have engulfed the Middle East over the past 2 decades and beyond have precipitated a scale of human suffering and dislocation that we have not witnessed since World War II. The destruction of cultural heritage has played a devastating role in this tragedy, obliterating the cultural identities that have given meaning and a sense of place to communities, in many cases for millennia. This unfolding catastrophe, reported in excruciating detail in both the conventional media and through an ever-expanding array of social media, has captivated global attention, galvanizing calls for the documentation and preservation of this threatened and disappearing heritage, perceived by many to represent a collective global patrimony. As my colleague Umar Harmanshah has argued, the widespread destruction of cultural remains that we are witnessing in the Middle East, regardless of who the perpetrators are or might be, can be seen as a form of place-based violence that aims to annihilate the local sense of belonging and the collective sense of memory among local communities to whom that heritage belongs. The response has been intense, extensive, and not without controversy, and it has resulted in a proliferation of cultural heritage projects and initiatives seeking to document and mitigate the ongoing destruction. Certainly, conflict is but one of the agents of cultural heritage destruction. Others include agricultural intensification and economic development, urban sprawl, and looting for the international antiquities market. Collectively, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as my colleague Gil Stein has often described them. The issues are profoundly complex and invariably deeply contested. Here, I wish primarily to focus on the question of cultural identity and the fundamental importance of memory in preserving a community's threatened cultural heritage. As almost 2 centuries of ancient Near Eastern scholarship has shown, indisputably, cultural diversity has been foundational to and an inextricable part of the long history of civilizations that have flourished in the Middle East. And it is the accumulated experience of this deep and rich cultural legacy as an old growth forest that continues to inform and shape the living communities of the present. So I want to say and speak more or look more at the concept of community memory. Memory, and more specifically, collective or social memory, has gained increasing interest and attention in Near Eastern archaeological research. Particularly influential has been Paul Connarton's seminal study, How Societies Remember. By asking how societies remember rather than simply noting that they do, Connarton was able to frame the study of collective or social memory in a manner accessible to archaeology. He proposed that social memory is generated by collective commemorative ceremonies, which in turn are reinforced by what he called individual bodily practices or habits, and inscribing practices, which enable communities to share or store recorded memories. Connerton's theory of social memory generation has been appealing, particularly to archaeologists, because of its description of formative social behavior that typically has left a material trace, and not only in the form of large public commemorative ceremonies, but also in the many types of ritual activities that communities commonly engage in, for example, mortuary behavior, ancestral veneration, etc. And the inscribed monuments such as stela, sculptures, and relief that they often produce. While much archaeological application of Connerton's theory of social memory has been understandably focused on conscious community activities such as performative commemorative events and ritual ceremonies, I believe it can also be witnessed in more mundane, though still fundamentally formative, community behaviors, most notably settlement and land use. The Middle Eastern landscape is striking for its distinctive settlement morphology. It is a landscape dominated by tells, the Arabic term, or huyuk in Turkish, tepe in Persian, for the tens of thousands of ancient settlement mounds that populate its diverse topography. The tell is not only the dominant archaeological feature in this landscape, it also typically is the most visible or conspicuous, and as a result has played an anchoring role as a sort of memory bank for local communities over the millennia. As my former teacher, Tony Wilkinson, noted more than 20 years ago, the longevity of the Middle Eastern tell, together with its visibility and its place value, have combined to form a sanctity of place that more nondescript, flat settlements cannot convey. Moreover, as the progressive accumulation of millennia of communal settlement activity, the Middle Eastern tell projects a considerable time depth and a sense of long-term stability that contrasts with the impermanence of the surrounding landscape. Colleague Sharon Stedman similarly has described these ancient mounds as reliquaries of prehistoric lifeways, and the interconnected landscapes they formed as matrices of meaning and human cognition. And I would like to add also of community memory. As prominent and immobile features of this landscape, tells are an example of path dependency, structuring subsequent settlement activity and land use, whether these ancient mounds remain continuously occupied or not. Wilkinson and his students have pioneered the study of the ancient Near Eastern landscape, documenting both the remarkable resilience of ancient anthropogenic landforms, sometimes preserved even today after millennia in the form of relic landscapes, and the formative role this activity has had in shaping subsequent settlement and land use. This has been demonstrated perhaps most vividly in the Syrian Jazeera, where satellite imagery and regional surveys have documented the extensive network of settlements that emerged in the late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age, linked together by pathways described by Wilkinson many, many years ago as linear holloways, forming nucleated settlement landscapes of Bronze Age tells. While the original choice of location might typically have been its access to arable land, a dependable water supply, its defensibility, or its control of an important pass or trade route, such rational incentives to remain nucleated to the same place, however, were almost always complemented by powerful symbolic motivations. These have often taken the form of religious structures, which further reinforce the sanctity of the site. Indeed, one of the most striking features of the Middle Eastern tell is the remarkable continuity with which they mark and preserve common sacred space, even if the specific religious tradition has changed over time, from a Bronze Age tell, often to a Christian church, and then eventually an Islamic mosque. This has been documented perhaps most vividly at Megiddo, ancient Tel Mutasalim, the archetypal Levantine tell settlement, where the University of Chicago's landmark excavations in the 1920s and 30s revealed a succession of religious structures in this area B section that you see in this area photograph, beginning in the earliest basal levels of the settlement during the late Neolithic and continuing stratigraphically through a succession of occupational phases until at least the early Iron Age, consistently delineating and designating this area of the settlement as a sacred space for almost 4 millennia. It's remarkable. Also distinctive is the evidence that the earliest sedentary communities in the Middle East expressed a sense of land ownership through ancestral veneration and the construction of formal burial grounds, beginning with the subfloor human burials and representations commonly found in the houses of the early agricultural village communities of the Natufian and pre-pottery Neolithic periods, as seen, for example, maybe most famously at Ain Ghazal, and even more dramatically, perhaps, in the sprawling early Bronze Age settlements of the southeastern Dead Sea Plain, most famously at Babadra, with its charnel houses brilliantly characterized by Meredith Cheshian as libraries of the dead. That such land claims are almost certainly bound by kinship reinforces powerfully the deeply felt ancestral relationship to a place. A kin group that established a relationship with a particular place by literally grounding identity in an integral sense of kinship to that place, passed that identity and an ownership of place on to ensuing generations, instilling a sense of belonging and a responsibility to revere and protect that location, such that the connection between place and kin group became so deeply intertwined that the identity of both the community and the individual also became inextricably bound to that locality. In a recent study of the local community resident in the vicinity of the large Bronze and Iron Age mound site of Zirat Tepe, ancient Tushan, in southeastern Turkey, Melissa Rosenzweig and Laurent Dessard document the remarkably resilience and tenacity of such ancestral land claims, despite the absence of any direct archaeological or textual evidence. The local community maintained an active claim and continuing connection to the ancient settlement through the existence and maintenance of an ancestral burial ground on the high mound of the site. And they strongly resisted attempts by local authorities to prevent them from continuing to maintain their connection to this ancient mound. The importance of community memory has been illustrated similarly and powerfully in my own experience at Tayinat, ancient Kunalua, on the plain of Antioch, or Amuk Plain in the Hatay province of southeastern Turkey, as I mentioned earlier. At the site, at the time of the University of Chicago's excavations at Tayinat in the 1930s, the excavators reported the presence of a sheikh's tomb and a modern cemetery on the high mound of the site. At some point, probably in the 1950s, this cemetery was removed and the remaining graves relocated to a new cemetery that was established adjacent to the ancient mound on its southern slope. Despite having occurred more than a half century before and the passing of at least 2 generations, the local community remained acutely aware and concerned about the existence and location of the original burial ground. To return to Connerton's concept of how societies remember, in the Middle East, it is clear that the mundane archaeological tell, as the repository of the collective memories, experiences, and activities of the communities that have lived there for millennia, represents a foundational grounding source of such community memory. Now I'd like to move to the focus of cultural heritage and its relationship to community engagement. There is a broadening recognition by Near Eastern archaeologists that conducting fieldwork in the Middle East can never be a completely apolitical endeavor. There has also been a growing awareness and unease about the dynamics of inequality typically embedded in the research agendas of archaeological projects. And there's been much growing literature on this. Such concerns are further compounded by the complications of working in contexts where social-cultural conditions do not reflect Western value systems. In response, there's been a growing call for approaches that reflect multivocal, non-exclusive, non-hierarchical methods of archaeological field research. Such forms of community archaeology emphasize the creation of permeable boundaries that allow non-archaeologists to have access to excavation sites and activities that promote archaeological research and education. This inclusive approach to community archaeology should also allow for non-archaeological stakeholders, especially within the local community, to pursue non-archaeological concerns in and around ancient sites, to articulate their own agendas and define their interests and stake in these sites. Community archaeology, first and foremost, must be archaeology conducted within communities. In so doing, such an approach not only preserves the integrity of the archaeological project, it also expands the value of a site as the location of both its scientific, historic, and contemporary meaning. Community archaeology also requires a long-term commitment and time investment. Recent studies have provided wonderful examples of how such community engagement might be done and the powerful transformative impact such engagement can have, both within the local community but also for participating researchers. Examples might include scholarly exchanges or collaborative partnerships between researchers or Middle Eastern research institutions that is bidirectional. These might also include staff exchanges, for example, conservators or exhibit design teams, with the aim of learning from the expertise and experiences of each other. In a recent Ancient Near East Today article, Iraqi colleague and scholar Jafar Jothari draws attention to the long and tortured history of Western colonial exploitation of the cultural heritage of Iraq. And he calls on Western scholars to redress this legacy by partnering with their Iraqi colleagues to help with the staggering cultural heritage preservation challenges the country faces. Rather than demanding permits to excavate sites of our Western choosing, Jothari has urged that we, one, select sites for excavation based on Iraq's needs, involve local Iraqi expertise, train and empower Iraqi archaeologists, open social media accounts for these projects, commit to participating in the conservation of archaeological sites, host and participate in archaeological conferences and exhibitions in Iraq, as well as publish the results of our excavations in Arabic in Iraqi journals, rather than only in Western publications, and assist in the development of Iraqi museums and cooperate with other excavation teams, notably Iraqi projects. It's a long list, but it's a really good list, and I recommend going back to reading that really powerful piece in Ancient Near Eastern Today that was published a few years ago. So why does this matter? The experience can be powerfully transformative, first of all. Archaeological fieldwork that actively engages local communities has a well-documented capacity to build understanding across often deep cultural and ethnic divides. Local community engagement is the right ethical thing to do, but it is also enlightened self-interest in a climate of mounting resentment to centuries of Western exploitation and intervention in the Middle East. Let me give a particularly poignant example. In the aftermath of the U.S. invasion of Iraq and the social and political chaos that ensued, the destruction of Iraq's cultural heritage drew considerable international attention and concern. And significant resources were mobilized in an effort to halt this destruction and the widespread trafficking of antiquities that ensued. However, this attention focused primarily on the intrinsic value and importance of Iraqi heritage, which is staggeringly rich and spectacular to be sure. But it largely failed to recognize the formative role that culture plays in shaping identities, values, and ways of life. Largely absent in both the scholarly literature and the work of policymakers has been a recognition of the corrosive effect and impact the destruction of Iraq's cultural heritage has had on collective national Iraqi identity and on the rise of ethno-religious sectarianism and violence. As is now being increasingly recognized, however, especially in the aftermath of the ISIS occupation and control of Mosul and much of northern Iraq, the unprecedented scale and magnitude of the destruction of Iraq's cultural heritage has contributed directly to the erosion of the complex, intersecting and overlapping spheres of Iraqi identity politics, which in turn has provided fertile ground for the growth and spread of radicalized sectarian ideologies. Time does not permit a review of the many organizations, projects, and initiatives now mobilized to respond to the cultural heritage crisis in the Middle East. Before concluding, however, I would like to draw on two recent examples from my own experience. The first takes us back to Tayinat, to the archaeological project that I've been directing in southeastern Turkey. On February 6, 2023, at approximately 4:17 a.m., in the morning when people were still sleeping, local time, a succession of devastating earthquakes hit southeast Turkey and southwest Syria. The destruction throughout the region was extensive, and nearly totaled in the city of Antakya, an urban center with a population of more than 1 million people. Tens of thousands were killed and many more grievously wounded. More than 90% of the city's housing and infrastructure was eventually condemned. Sadly, the 2023 earthquakes was only the latest disaster to hit this region, as I've already alluded earlier at the outset of my talk, compounding more than a decade of devastation and suffering from the ongoing civil war. And here I show a slide of some of the displaced communities in that immediate vicinity. And then in the second slide, an overlay of those displaced communities within the dense and incredibly rich cultural legacy or cultural heritage of this region. The response, both locally or nationally from the international community, was remarkable, indeed inspiring, yet also uneven, complex, and not without political opportunism. And our response, it was both deeply personal. We had been working in this region with community for almost 25 years at that point. And so our initial response was to try and do anything we could to help. And there were many other similar examples of the one I give here, of archaeological projects who began trying to raise funds to try and bring immediate relief to the communities that we had been living with and working with, in many cases for decades. And then it began to move more into pragmatic concerns, in our case, dealing with the destruction of our excavation compound, our depots, with more than 1 million artifacts, and also the effort to start rebuilding research facilities. And here you see some slides of that experience, the heroic work, mostly of our Turkish colleagues in this context, who went in immediately in the aftermath to try and save as much of the material as we could. And here you see us working in the grounds of one of the other excavation compounds, expeditions that was generously made available to us. The community spirit and the collective efforts to try and help in this immediate aftermath of the tragedy that had happened was amazing, and it was a really powerful part of the response that took place. And here you see some of the efforts to try and restore some of the archaeological ruins or remains of the site, and then also the efforts to begin building a new compound. But there's other parts to this response that I want to share. As the community has moved to rebuild, we have been invited to engage and participate in multiple ways, including both the resumption or the invitation to resume archaeological fieldwork at Tayinat, but also to participate in the ongoing restoration of the archaeological heritage of the region. And that has included working in a very sensitive context with the heavily damaged archaeological museum in Antakya, the Hatay Archaeological Museum that you see here. We had been working before the earthquake on trying to restore some of the sculptures from our excavations, and here you see some of that work underway. And we were asked in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake by the Turkish authorities if we would be willing to come and resume that work and begin trying to help them with the restoration work on that material within the museum. And one of the things that has come out of that has been remarkable has been a number of discoveries that have enabled us to start talking about the possibility of preparing these sculptures for an exhibition that's planned in the next year or two. And one of those has been a female statue that we've reported on and presented here in various contexts. This female statue, Neo-Hittite sculpture that we've been involved with trying to do reconstruction through 3D shape matching, through PXRF, and so on. But also, remarkably, going back through old field records, in this case from the Chicago excavations in the 1930s, and beginning to realize that there were fragments that had been discovered in the 1930s that might match with the sculpture that we had now found. And I give you an example of how that came to be. We found other pieces like this hand of this figure that we've begun trying to restore, but most dramatically we found that piece that I showed in the upper left-hand part of this slide, which we were able through a 3D scan and then a 3D print to locate as a part of the chest of this figure. And it was remarkable also, not just because of the join, but also because it's part of a hieroglyphic Luwian inscription. It's the first person singular pronoun, I, and it's the beginning of an account of this person telling us who she was and what her life was. And so this project is ongoing, but the reason I've singled it out here is because in conjunction with the other sculptures, including the famous now Shupililiuma statue, which was a rallying cry in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, photographs like the ones that you see in this slide were published widely when it was discovered that he had somehow managed to withstand the destruction of the earthquake, and has become a kind of rallying symbol for the local community. And so in the aftermath of the community, the request to help restore these monuments and then place them on display in a museum as an exhibition, as a part of sort of a rising phoenix theme, is a very powerful one, and it's one that has been brought to us and which we have tried to respond to. The second example, and the last one, takes me back to Mosul and to the aftermath of the devastating destruction of that city. In the aftermath of the destruction and devastation of the Iraqi city of Mosul during the occupation by the Islamic State and the subsequent battle to retake the city, numerous foreign agencies and organizations launched initiatives to preserve and reconstruct the cultural heritage of this ancient city. These efforts were underpinned by assumptions about how the local community valued and engaged with their heritage, how the community perceived its destruction, whether it viewed reconstruction important and a priority, and the extent to which it welcomed these foreign-led efforts to restore their heritage. In a recent article, Benjamin Issacan and Lynn Meskel have challenged these assumptions, holding them up to empirical scrutiny through the aid of a survey of 1,600 Moslawi residents that explores their attitudes and views about their own cultural heritage. In broad terms, the survey confirmed, of course, not surprisingly perhaps, that the vast majority of Moslawis take great collective pride in their rich cultural heritage. They did not support its destruction and overwhelmingly approve of its preservation and reconstruction. However, the survey results also identified 4 key implications for current and future heritage projects in Mosul. 1, heritage reconstruction should not be privileged over basic humanitarian aid, development, and peace building. 2, it should include the rebuilding of local religious sites, not just iconic and or non-religious monuments. 3, it should involve the transformation of heritage sites into new and more useful structures and spaces for the community. And while acknowledging the contribution and support of foreign efforts, 4, the Moslawi and Iraqi community should have agency and ultimate control over the future of their heritage. Issacan and Meskel conclude that foreign-led cultural preservation initiatives must work to embed their preservation and reconstruction efforts within broader programs that seek to foster local social and civic institutions. Foreign agencies also should reconsider their preference for restoring iconic and or non-religious sites, and they need to abandon the determination that reconstruction must meet often elusive criteria of authenticity. Ultimately, foreign-led cultural preservation efforts must ensure that their work engages local communities and empowers them to be the custodians of their heritage. So I want to end with this example. In the fall of 2020, I was invited to come to Mosul. That was the peak of the pandemic. My boss at the University of Toronto said, no, do not go. And it was a very personal thing for me, having benefited from almost 40 years by this point of professional work in the Middle East, to not respond to this call, to come to Mosul to try and help in the assessment and also hopefully ultimately the planning for the restoration of the monuments of that city. And so I went. And in 2020, we began very modestly to start collecting the trash and to putting a fence around one of the main monuments of the site of Nineveh. I work with local authorities. You can see here conversations, extensive conversations and consultations we had with the mayor, the local municipality, the State Board of Antiquities, and other institutions within the community, and hearing from them about what they thought would be most helpful in how we should proceed. We identified essentially 3 primary goals. The first was to map and structurally and assess the extensive network of tunnels that had been excavated underneath the foundations of the gate system that we were looking at. By the way, just to digress, these were not mining operations pursuing monuments that could be sold on the antiquities market. This was part of a defensive strategy that ISIS had built into their defense in anticipation of the coming battle to retake the city. And here you see my colleague Steve Batchuk. We spent much of 2021 trying to document these tunnels and assess their stability and risk for collapse, which would destroy the structural integrity of the monuments there, of the gate system. And that was clearly the case. It was unequivocal to us that unless something was done urgently, the whole thing risked collapsing. And so I basically went to Baghdad and started making cold calls to anyone I could meet with in various embassies asking for help. I'd never done anything like this before. I was a traditional archaeologist, after all, and eventually was led to some sympathetic ears at the United Nations Development Program, who initially said, "We don't do culture, but let's take a look." And they came. They had been working extensively in the aftermath of the destruction or rebuilding of the city on enormous building projects in Mosul. So they had lots of experience and expertise. They had lots of equipment and resources. And they came back and said, "You're absolutely right. If we don't do anything quickly, there's a risk the whole thing will collapse." And so here you see them. They actually went and found some funds. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have the expertise, the wherewithal to do anything about this. But they came in and did this intervention that you see here, putting up the scaffolding and then hiring a whole team of local people to come in, local staff workers to help with repacking the holes, the tunnels that had been excavated by ISIS with sandbags. And I just want to note with this slide in the upper left-hand corner of that image, what had been done in that area before was that it had been used as essentially a junkyard by ISIS during its period of control, collecting toilets, refrigerators, and other Western, products that they found to be reprehensible. And it was a difficult space in the local community's mind about that area. There had been difficult things that had happened there. So we began then in 2022 on the third part of this. So the first was the stabilizing of the tunnels. Second was documenting the material, excavating, and then beginning a project of restoration. So this began in 2022, and this is an important point, I think, for all of us as archaeologists to keep in mind. And this has been my experience over and over in these anecdotal examples that I've been giving, that once we've gone in to begin working on this kind of restoration and stabilizing work, we often encounter amazing archaeological discovery as well. And that has been the case at the Shamash Gate. I don't want to go into the archaeology here, but I'll just very quickly show you, just to give you a bit of a sense, a tease, as it were, of just how rich the archaeological record has been in this experience. In the gate, as we've gone down into the floors of the central pathway and then into the side chambers, we've come down on destruction debris, almost certainly from the 612 destruction of Nineveh that has included articulated human remains, extensive evidence of an intense conflagration or conflict that took place in that gate system, and also hundreds of fragments of a stela, which thus far the person who's been working with us on this, the epigrapher Gianni Marchesi from Bologna, has identified as an Ashurbanipal stela, a pretty unique and exciting discovery that we never anticipated when we started out on this whole experience. Here you see some slides, some of the decorative features, and essentially we're talking about something that probably looks like this stela from the reign of Esarhaddon. It would be a unique find for this late Neo-Syrian context. We've begun working with epigraphers using all of the latest kinds of software to try and begin transcribing this monument, even as we continue to excavate more pieces of it, conserve it, and then restore it. And finally, we've continued to excavate and document this massive gate system, which is proving to be remarkably well preserved. It's presented lots of interesting archaeological research questions and discoveries. Here you see some of that work during the 2024 season, and again in 24 and 2025. It has presented enormous challenges, given that we're working at about a 20-meter vertical elevation from top to bottom. And it has involved the third part, the restoration part. And here you can see the slides from just a few weeks ago. Our team was there working with the local group to start restoring this gate system. And this has been done in conjunction with, it's frozen here, with ongoing discussions with the local community. Sorry, I'm freezing. I'll just leave it be. With the local community about how this space might be transformed and preserved. And their unequivocal response has been the need for public spaces, open spaces. And so a decision was made to keep this large piece of land which flanks the eastern wall of the city of Nineveh as an open green space. And so we've been working with them very closely on the design and preparation of this space and the development of this archaeological park. And here you see it underway. And again, just a couple of weeks ago, as they were laying the green sod, you can see the Shamash Gate in the background there with the fortification walls. And the transformation of this space into a park has been remarkable and ongoing. And one of the more gratifying parts of all of this on a personal level has been watching communities play in this space in the evening with their families and children and so forth. Another part that has yet to be done is looking forward. We've been asked if we could help develop a site management plan for the complicated archaeological exploration history of Nineveh, as well as working towards the possibility of submitting a nomination or proposal for nomination of World Heritage status. Much more to be done there. We've also had wonderful engagement with various communities, groups, stakeholders. Here I just single out two of them. One of the more powerful experiences I've had in Mosul was when these students from Mosul University who were studying Assyriology and Akkadian came and were looking at some of the stones that have inscribed cuneiform texts on them and pulled out their little notebooks and were sitting there and transcribing the cuneiform on the spot, and sort of squeals of pleasure and excitement as they were able to identify words and parts of the text, as you see illustrated in the one slide of the female student who's down there trying to read the inscription. To return to the question, in conclusion, to return to the question I posed at the beginning of this paper, how can we respond to the current cultural heritage crisis? A fundamental commitment to building sustained, meaningful relationships and partnerships with Middle Eastern partners, both individuals and institutions, cultural heritage regulatory authorities, universities, non-governmental organizations, must be a core guiding commitment. Furthermore, this engagement must be bidirectional and consultative, prioritizing the concerns and agendas of these partners and stakeholders rather than unilaterally continuing to insert and assert our own. Responding to conflict damage certainly also is critical, and where and whenever possible, this attention should be proactive, seeking to assist in supporting the building of local infrastructure and capacity so that countries at peace, but at risk, are better equipped to protect their own heritage. How does this have anything to do with the future role of Western archaeological research in the Middle East? The moral and ethical imperative notwithstanding, including the demonstrated benefits of a commitment to community engagement, it is a simple, demonstrable fact or truth that archaeological fieldwork that prioritizes cultural heritage preservation inevitably also means working at the most important, albeit complex and difficult, archaeological sites in the region. since these sites invariably were and are also home to the most ancient historically and culturally significant communities of the ancient Near East. A commitment to cultural heritage preservation thus involves us in the critically important restorative work of post-conflict remediation and community building, while also participating actively, collegially, and collaboratively in the ongoing archaeological exploration and discovery of the great civilizations of the ancient Middle East that have played such a formative role in our shared global patrimony. Thank you for this opportunity to reflect and share on the important challenges confronting our discipline today, as well as the responsibilities and exciting possibilities, I believe, that await if we are to participate constructively, productively, and meaningfully in the profound transformations that are underway in the Middle East today. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn to Sharon. I know we have a Q&A. And I'm not quite, since I can't see anybody.
I know these lights. This wasn't this way in the past, but thank you. That was wonderful. You kept going ahead and answering the questions I was asking. It's just such a splendid call to action that we archaeologists need to be thinking about. I mean, it's really touched me, and you've taken away my questions. You kept answering them. But still, there comes to me the how. Every place is different, and every place is the same. And maybe you could share another anecdote, or what was the trickiest or weirdest situation you managed to get to convince people to come together with you to fix something? Is that a reasonable question? And then I'll open it up. Thank you.
So working in these places is excruciating, difficult, deeply depressing, actually. It's really tough. And often we ask the question, like, can we really do anything? And I think the answer to your question is to just work in the spaces that we are invited to come to. Almost all of the examples I've given were not anything that I had planned to do. I never planned almost any of what I ended up finding myself becoming involved in. And so I think the best answer I can give is not to give some large programmatic, systematic plan of action, but just to have integrity with your own immediate experience, your own immediate research, your own immediate projects, where you find yourself, whether it's in the field or otherwise, and to respond with the invitations that when you are invited to come, because that's what's happened to me. I keep being asked if I would come, if I would participate, if I would work, if I would help. And I've tried to respond as effectively as I could and to bring the resources that I might be able to mobilize to try and help do so. And leave it to that. I don't think I have any grand solutions or systematic proposals. I think for me, trying to wrestle with the overwhelming tragedy and chaos and violence and conflict of the Middle East is not to think of it in the large scale, but to try and operate and work within the immediate environments and communities and friends and relationships and sites and places that I find myself called to work. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but that's the best answer I can give.
It's a great answer. We do have this light situation up here. I think the best way to handle the questions is for us both to go down to the mic down there, and so you can see who's asking questions. Yeah, we really can't see up here.
Well,
it's kind of blinding.
Maybe nobody has a question because they're all thinking about what's waiting next door. So it's kind of tough to be trying to hold an audience here when they are wondering about what's waiting in the next room.
Well, let's give them a chance so we can see them if they're raising their hand. We're coming up. So we've got this light up here. People who raise their hand.
I'm not going to be able to solve the problems that you're alluding to, Bill, but I will say that I've spent, not as much in recent years, but certainly I've spent 20, 30 years of field work in Jordan and Israel. And I would say that it may not be a fully satisfactory answer, but the best I can do is how I operate and how I conduct myself in my own affairs in the immediate spaces, in the immediate communities, and immediate projects. And I do think you can have an impact. I absolutely believe you can, even in these incredibly complicated, conflicted, and contested realities that you're alluding to in Israel. Absolutely. I think, if I might maybe go too far and say, we tend to say it's overwhelming, it's such an intractable set of problems that we just become passive, and we say we can't do anything and we don't do anything. And I think that that's problematic as well. I do think we can do something within our own immediate communities and our own immediate places and projects and sites. I think we might need some lubrication here.
Yeah. We have stunned people into...
Okay, as a student who is like getting started in this and wanting to be able to like bring a more general sense of awareness and talk about this and be kind of an advocate moving forward for this like cultural heritage and making sure we're preserving and working with the people and just kind of moving forward, how should we go about talking about that with other people, and whether they be other professionals who have been in the field for a long time and don't necessarily want to change the way they're doing it, or maybe just other people who ask us questions about our work?
I might throw it back to you in a way by saying that I actually, in my own personal experience, have been challenged by students over and over and over again. And whatever I've done, in many ways, and the different examples that I've described this evening, were driven by conversations with students, with family, with very personal ones. So what I would say is, I think you have more agency than you may realize. And part of it is, I think, continuing to challenge your teachers, your elders about these things, and trying to have open conversation. What I fear, and it's because now I'm on that other side, I'm one of the elders, as it were, that I find over and over again that I have conversations, particularly with students who are afraid that if they say something, it will, that it's the end of their career. Because of the asymmetrical sort of power differentials in these kinds of relationships, they're afraid to speak because of what it might cost them professionally. So that's where I would focus, is to keep, and what I'm finding is an incredible courage among students to speak, to participate actively in conversations and in calling out authorities, leadership, institutions, universities on these issues. And that's happening from your generation more than it is from mine.
Thank you.
I believe your hand is up over there.
Tim, I have to say, I thank you very much for pointing out that the urgency of translating work into the local language, in your case, and into Arabic, because we have this problem in the Middle East. Now, for those who know me, they know that I work in one of the most difficult places in Lebanon and one also of the poorest. Some of my students, I teach 2 days per week in the Bekaa, and some of them cannot attend school. They choose 1 day because they cannot afford like the $1.50 they have to pay to come to university. What they suffer most is that the inaccessibility of research. Pretty much everything we have, if it's like of good quality, is either in French or in English, and of course in German, but very few of us read German. And they always complain that how do you want us to move forward into knowing our cultural heritage? Well, we don't know how to read the other languages. Why don't you write in the local language? So the fact that I encourage everyone who work in the Middle East to use the language of the local community in order to reach those community. It's not, we have to go to them, and especially the foreign missions, not them going to you. It has to be the other way. We have to go down from our podium where we put ourselves on, and then go do some community heritage and reach out to these people. And it starts with talking in their own language and publishing in their own language.
I endorse that 100%. I would only add further to what you said, Hanan. It's not as hard as it may seem with all of the tools and technologies that are at our disposal. It's not as hard. I think it just it requires a commitment to doing that. And in our experience, and it's easy for me to say it because I'm working with colleagues who are actually doing the translation, but it has been incredibly enriching, both from both me and the communities that when we publish. And we publish on a whole range, whether it's more formal, professional, academic articles, or little pieces that are published in the local newspaper, or going and speaking to these different groups, to the local NGOs and cultural groups that want to hear about what we're doing. All these kinds of things are ways to help. I found it to be consistently the case that there is a voracious appetite for this if we will just simply participate in it and make it an important priority of our time. Susan. Depends on what the question is, I guess. Oh, I can't get it off.
It's too high. But Tim, your two case studies at the end were about projects that you direct at Tayinat and now at Mosul. But you're directing something else currently, which is ISAC. Could you speak about some of your ambitions for how ISAC might embrace some of the ideologies and ideas that you've expressed here?
I'm going to partially dodge that because there's a lot happening at ISAC. A lot of exciting things that are happening at ISAC I'd love to talk about. But to answer your question in the context of tonight's focus, I want to actually point out and mention a colleague. I mentioned him with the reference to the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and that's Gil Stein. We have a center in Chicago. I should emphasize right away, it's not the only place. There are multiple centers and organizations that have begun emerging to work on the kind of cultural heritage projects, whether it's conservation restoration work, whether it's educational programs, training. There's a whole spectrum of things. And at ISAC, at the University of Chicago, we've created a center, and that's really been Gil who has launched this. We refer to it as the C3HP because it's a long label, but it's become a very important part of the research focus and mission of the Institute and the larger scholarly community at Chicago to really engage on these cultural heritage concerns. And in fact, many of the points I made tonight, in some ways, I'm stealing them from Gil and from colleagues because they share, I think if I can speak for them a little bit, they share, this is part of the vision of trying to really bring that in. And while on the one hand, when we're having internal conversations with colleagues at the university, we want to emphasize that cultural heritage preservation has been a part of the Institute's mission from the very beginning. And you can think about some of the famous projects, even the epigraphic survey at Chicago House in Luxor. It's a fundamentally conservation organized or initiated project. But these other aspects of dealing with training, with educational programs and so on, has expanded that mission, I would say, and it's become a really important part of what we are trying to be involved in at ISAC. And like I said, a lot of that's being led by Gil and his team with the C3HP. So I'm happy to, I think I should leave it at that because there's a lot more that we could say, but it is an important priority, and it's one of the areas that we've prioritized in terms of our research mission at the Institute.
I think we should let Tim off the hook.
I think we have one, maybe we can give one last
Okay,
one
I'm
here,
sorry.
and then we'll stampede for the water.
I greatly appreciate your talk, and I imagine that most people in this room welcome the encouragement to undertake the kinds of endeavors that you are speaking about and confront the sorts of difficulties that you have also been pointing to throughout the course of your talk, plus others. Students have raised questions, people have raised questions about what needs to be done on the ground in the places where we focus our work. But the most intractable problems of all are on this soil, in this country, where in universities across from coast to coast, programs in humanistic study are being decimated, not by our consent, of course, but language study is being cut right and left. The possibilities for studying archaeology, the possibilities for learning Arabic, for learning Turkish, for learning ancient languages too. These are being curtailed not only by political forces on the national level and in some places on the state level, but by our own university administrations. Well, you're in a position to do something to affect those dynamics. So I'd like to ask you, what tactics or strategies have you found effective in helping to preserve the disciplines in which we work in the face of these assaults?
I think we should go for a drink. No, you absolutely. I mean, that is the question of our time. I mean, and I don't disagree with your characterization, really, of almost all of what you've said about the state of affairs. And it's very easy to get discouraged by the sort of onslaught of it and the scale of it. And I don't know that I have immediate answers of sort of a grand plan of how to respond to this. Some of it, as we read about all the time, it's overwhelming because it's been just like repeated and like it's like a hammer blow every day kind of unrelenting assault. And that's even more difficult because it just is easy to become overwhelmed. However, I believe that it's not, I do believe we have, I'm hopeful, I really am. I don't think that we're about to go into extinction and that the end times are here. I really think that there's opportunity, that there's ways that we can respond, that we can try to work on these. I don't think that that's going to be a quick solution. I don't know that it's helpful in this context to personalize it to how we're trying to deal with this within our own institution at the University of Chicago. I mean, everybody's heard about some, and you know, there's some of it's not, one of the problems is sometimes the information, you know, becomes larger than the reality of what actually has happened. So some of the problems and the let's say the challenges, the damage that's being done in the humanities programs at Chicago, I actually am much more optimistic and hopeful about that situation. I think there's been bad decision-making there, and I think there's things that can be done about that, and I am hopeful that we will be able to address those. But that's a very sort of local, if not unimportant fight and one institution. And you're asking about something that's systemic almost across the entire culture and society. Part of the answer is to focus on what you can do something about within your own immediate. I keep coming back to that. That's one of the things that I confront when I get discouraged. It's overwhelming, and if you get lost in the scale of the problem, it can be paralyzing. So trying to come back and really just relentlessly coming back and looking at things in the immediate present context. What can I do? What can we do about that? But another part of it is communication. There is enormous misinformation, I believe, that is at the heart about, for example, the humanities and its value and its role in our society. So when you have misinformation, that means that the facts aren't actually accurately being conveyed. And if we can address that problem, there should already begin to be some, I think, change potentially as well. But I'm not going to be able to solve all of these issues, and I think I'm just going to frustrate everybody by continuing to talk here and try and give examples of some of the things that we've been doing in our own personal. But I am hopeful. I don't feel like the wolf is at the door. Like, I think we have ways, and I don't think, I mean, there's lots of scholarship on this sort of perpetual crisis of the humanities that's not even new, that is part of the conversation as well. It's an incredibly complicated and complex issue. And of course, political circumstances change and come and go as well, so that's another part of it. I know that's not a satisfactory answer, but it's part of an answer to a vast and overwhelming problem that there's no way I or anybody in this room can provide some kind of a response to. Especially when we're thinking about the drinks and the commiserations and the socializing that awaits next door.
Thank you, Tim. I just want to add to that. You are all here. You all care. This is a standing room only audience. Yes, the front seats are always empty, but I've been observing people in the back standing. Politics are local and national. You care. I'm not saying go out there and fight. I'm go out there and act and help correct that misinformation and do your thing. And together, we can make this happen. We have a chance. It's not guaranteed, but we have a chance. So thank you all for coming here.